Yeah.
Yep.
Thank you. Well, thanks for coming on a wet and windy day. Today, we're delighted to host Jonathan F.P. Rose, who's a leader of the green building movement in the United States, and he will be presenting his work on bringing energy and climate change reducing strategies to affordable housing in the US. I'm grateful to Rosler for the introduction after she met Jonathan recently to discuss his work. Jonathan, just as a brief introduction, founded a multidisciplinary real estate development and investment firm back in 1989. Maybe you can't believe it's that long ago now, I don't know, but really to address challenges, declining ecologies and poor distribution of opportunity that people see. And business has received since then global recognition for its model and particularly for the green affordable housing project, if I pronounce it correctly, Via Verde, which was developed in 2012, 10 years ago, in South Bronx in New York City. And this project has become a model for affordable and middle income type housing. So I think that's one of the things that makes it very attractive for us to learn more. So 10 years on, the firm has just opened a new phase, and I think we've corrected the typo on the website, of Sendero Verde, a mixed-use, mixed-income community development that's just been certified as the largest passive house development outside of Europe. Fantastic. And the firm is also one of the largest purchasers of land for affordable housing and for greening by retrofit and so on. So I should also say you've not been silent on the other side, following on from a prize-winning book about the future of urban life. I understand, Jonathan, you're working on the next book, The Well-Tempered Society. So I don't know if that follows on from the well-tempered clavichord, but it sounds like a great outcome to aim for. And he's currently he's an entrepreneur in residence, executive in residence at the Side Business School. So hopefully we'll hear from Jonathan about strategies on the guided development of affordable and green housing and the lessons learned on the way. So over to you, Jonathan.
Thank you. And thank you all for coming here on a cold and windy night. So, okay, I pushed the button.
Just need to bring the screen to the front. There you go.
Okay, let's try it again. All right. So first of all, as you all know, there are some global conditions that are affecting all of society. The first is a vast amount of income inequality rising. There's racism, certainly in America. There's climate change and biodiversity loss, and many other issues, but these are really large themes. And to me, any socially responsible business that, in fact, any venture that we do really should try and simultaneously address all of these. And that too often environmental solutions or social solutions have been put in separate boxes. And my goal is to try and integrate them all. And so I'm going to just give you a brief overview of our company. The foundation of it is the idea that all families deserve to thrive and have well-being. And the basis for that is the platform is green, stable, affordable, and mixed income communities. Green because what's interesting about the environmental focus that we have is not only on the external environment, but also on the quality of life of the residents. So in addition to trying to do buildings that are climate impact reducing, we also focus on buildings that are non-toxic for the residents. And affordable, I have a friend who says it's very hard to do homework when you live under a bridge. And we see this in Oxford, we see this all over I was going to say the developed world, but even the undeveloped world, the lesser developed world. More and more people can't afford safe, decent housing. So we think this is the platform. And then it needs to be surrounded by supportive neighborhoods, and networks that provide health and social education services. You know, you should live. This requires public and private investment. And we believe this should all be informed by research and knowledge. And this is, by the way, our company logo. And one of our goals is then to create models of best practice and then disseminate the ideas that we have and try and change the systems. And I'll describe a little bit about how Via Verde did that. Okay, so just a brief overview of our company. We have 8 offices. We have, actually, this is an outdated slide. We have 500 employees. about $3.9 billion of investment and altogether 18,000 units of housing, some of which we built and some of what which is affordable housing that we have bought. The company does four things. We develop new affordable and mixed income housing. We buy older existing buildings that are at risk of being gentrified. We preserve them and keep them affordable. We focus on reducing our environmental impact and what we call communities of opportunity. We focus on increasing the health and social and educational benefits that families that live in our projects have so that they can move forward with their lives. On the decarbonization side, the U.S. Department of Energy has the following framework which we follow. So the first thing we do is efficiency, and that happens both through technical things like better insulation and LED lights, et cetera, but it also happens through change in behavior of how we occupy buildings. And then the next thing is we need to get rid of fossil fuels and electrify everything. And the next thing, which is a little bit harder in denser buildings, is on-site renewables, so solar energy if possible. Grid interactivity, which means that we really need distributed energy systems, buildings that are overproducing solar during certain times of day, and yet they can't sell that back. Off-site renewables, so actually one of the things we are thinking of as a company, because we can't create enough on-site power, is in certain grids, can we build big off-site plants and use that? And the last thing is RECs, which are renewable, which is like a credit you can get for buying green power from somebody else. So what I'm going to focus on a lot is how do we create energy efficiency? How do we reduce our energy use on-site ourselves?
Jonathan, would you mind speaking up slightly to the online audience, please?
Yes, okay. Yeah, would it help if wait, I'm going to just try something. Nope, that's not going to work. All right, so audience, is this better? I mean, I'll try and talk louder too. Why don't we just do that? Or I could go like this, I could sit down, I could sit lower. Why do I do that? Okay, is this better, I hope? Or okay.
Some, but not to others.
It's say it again.
It's clear to some, but not to
but
others.
not to others. Okay.
Thank you.
All right. Well, audience who's out there, I'm glad you're there, and I'm going to try and talk louder for you. So we focus on renewable energy, on water conservation. Now, what's really interesting about water conservation is there's an energy side to it too. So, for example, when you put low flow shower heads, and if you reduce the water use by say 30%, then you're also reducing the hot water use by 30%. So therefore you're saving the heat, the energy needed to heat the water. So these things are all tied together. Healthy materials, the guy on the upper right is actually filling non-toxic cleaning fluids. There's a lot of things in contemporary homes that are quite toxic. And so we're all focused on reducing chemical inputs. Resilience, so one of the things is having battery backup systems, so when the power goes out, which it will increasingly do because of climate change, that our buildings can, the elevators will continue to work, the heat will continue to work, people can charge their cell phones, etc. We do a lot of monitoring reporting. We actually use a third-party company to report on all of our energy and water use and the climate reduction impacts of that, because it's very easy to fool yourself. There's a lot of, as you have probably heard, kind of positive impact statements that everybody's making about what they're doing. And that's one of the reasons why we like third parties to actually monitor what we're doing and say what we're really doing. And decarbonization, this happens to be a project, one of the first in California, of removing existing fossil fuel powered equipment and replacing it with electric. Okay, so I'm going to describe three projects: Via Verde, Sendero Verde, and an acquisition rehab. Okay, this is a picture of the South Bronx, an aerial photo in 1996. It's a very poor area of New York, and it underwent tremendous amount of abandonment and financial distress in the 70s and 80s, and that resulted in buildings kind of, and ultimately the city tore them down. And so here you are in the heart of a city, And you see all this vacant land. And by the way, over time, through a series of affordable housing programs, it's entirely filled. There's no vacant land left. And that took 25 years. And that shows one of the importances of consistent government commitment to to regeneration. And that's what happened. Mayor after mayor all consistently worked to rebuild this neighborhood. We, as a company, have done work in this area, and so we are familiar with it. This site, so the red star is where Via Verde is. As I said, it's in the South Bronx. It's very well served by buses and subways. It's got good transportation access. It's a long triangular, skinny triangular site. And so it's very difficult to redevelop it. Building the rest of the South Bronx, this one kind of got left behind. And so a group of architects and not-for-profits convinced the city to put out an RFP and said, since you don't really care about this site that much anyway, why don't you put out a challenge for somebody to build a really green, new affordable housing? Now, at the time, the culture of affordable housing was very distant from the culture of environment. There was this belief that any penny that one spent more to make a building green would be a penny less spent on affordable housing. I used to be told, so back at that time, America built 100,000 new affordable housing units a year, which is very low. And today we only build 50,000 a year. But back then people would say to me, if you raise the cost of housing with your stupid green ideas, 1%, and we only build 99,000 units because that extra cost instead of 100, there'll be 1,000 homeless families and they'll all be your fault. That's what people used to say to me. And so I had to learn how to build green buildings without spending a penny more than the normal budget, which was a very, very good discipline. So anyway, this competition came out and people competed from all over the world, and our company won, and we won it with a local not-for-profit called Phipps Housing, and we put together an architectural partnership of a local architect named Datner and a fantastic London-based firm called Grimshaw that had just opened a New York office. The idea, which was then considered quite unusual, was that the roofs would all be green. Now, today, I don't know what the practice is in the UK, but we're all building green roofs everywhere because it just makes complete sense. And it's a tremendous resident amenity. But back in those days, it was considered very unusual. So we designed this very diverse roofscape and then applied it to this building. So what the building is actually kind of a U. And one thing that was really obvious to me was that to put the tall part of the building on the north side and the low part of the building on the south side to allow as much sun in. When we looked at the finalists of the competition, it was really interesting. I was sure everybody else was going to do that, and actually nobody else did that. The second thing was that since it was a very thin site to start with, we designed a thin building. Normally in buildings in New York City are 60 feet wide because they're double loaded corridors. This has single loaded corridors, which I'll explain in a minute. But that allowed every unit to have cross ventilation. The left side of the building, the taller part, the 150 units are low income rental units. On the right are 71 middle income co-ops. We really believe in mixed income. So this is the strategy, the cross ventilation strategy. So every unit has a living room, dining room, kitchen on the ground floor, and then a stair that goes up, and then it connects on the second floor to 2 bedrooms and bathrooms and laundry machines. And when you fit these pieces, so like a jigsaw, then you get a corridor on every other floor. So you actually have more floor space than normal dedicated to living versus circulation. And as I said, you get cross ventilation. This is what the final building looked like. And this does not look like normal affordable housing of the time. Remember, this was designed, we won this competition in 2008. And so remember I was talking about creating models for systems change. When this building opened, it was on the front page of the New York Times. It won all these global awards from all over the world, including the Royal Society of Architects in the UK. And it woke people up to the idea that affordable housing could and should be green, and that affordable housing could and should be attractive. And so we're seeing after Via Verde all kinds of design competitions, and the idea that that affordable housing is a long-term commitment to a neighborhood and could really make a positive impact if it was well designed. Previous to this, essentially most affordable housing design, the question was, how cheap can you make it? Amongst the strategies, so first of all, we're using passive sunshades. This is a very thick, prefabricated, actually insulated facade, and you see solar on the roof. On the right-hand side, that's a stair tower, and because we made the buildings thinner, normally stair towers are in the center of a building. This, we brought it out to the facade and then use that to encourage people to walk. So this is also a building that launched the fit building movement, the idea, what's called active design, the idea that a building could actually encourage more exercise and activity. So here's a view of the cascading roofs from the top. We actually saved these stones from the excavation and kind of put them at the entrance. Starting at the bottom level, there's a children's play area, and then you see this amphitheater, and above the amphitheater, an orchard where we grow apples and pears, and above that, a series of community gardens. And those are, by the way, fed by, on the right is a system that captures rainwater and purifies it. On the left is composting. And then above that is an exercise room. Often in affordable housing, if they had an exercise room, would be in the basement somewhere. This is filled with light. We're trying to encourage people. And this is the inside of a typical apartment. So these are pretty nice. Notice in the kitchen, there's this little desk. So we're kind of very efficient in use of spaces. It's almost like creating a free study out of the space. The rest of the living room, this takes you up the stairs. This is one of the bedrooms, the washer dryer. So they're really well-designed units that don't feel that are places that people would be proud to live in. And then the other thing is we actively program. So this is, for example, movie night in the amphitheater. And the orchard also includes Christmas trees. And we had thought, so we planted, I think, 20 Christmas trees. And the idea was each year we'd cut one and plant one, and there'd be a cycle, and there'd always be a new Christmas tree in the lobby. But what happened was that families loved to light them all up and take their kind of annual family picture posing out by the trees. So we keep them this way. Just a sense of we're achieving 37% reduction over a normal affordable housing building in this location. And this shows where the savings come from. More efficient elevators, ventilation, hot water, lighting, PV. You see space heating and cogeneration are big pieces of it, but it takes all these elements to really add up to energy efficiency. And so I think sometimes we over anchor on things like photovoltaics or, one particular strategy. This point is, I think, is that we need all of them. Okay. 10 years later, we started a project called Sendero Verde, which, as mentioned, is the largest passive house project in the United States. This is in East Harlem. It is about 700 units of mixed income housing, serving families from formerly homeless to middle income. We designed it as the passive house project. It's the largest passive house project in the world outside of Europe right now. Everything that's green is passive house. The blue is energy efficient, but it's not passive house. On the right side, it's a charter school, a 50,000 square foot middle school. And on the left side, a whole series of community serving spaces that for a variety of reasons. So there's about 12,000 square feet of after-school programs, social lunches and meals for seniors, social service programs, health center, all that. And one of the interesting things is how you seal in between those. The other thing is that I try to have all our projects designed to Fibonacci proportions so that they have an innate sense of kind of connection with nature. This is how the proportions lay both vertically and horizontally through the building. And then in the middle is this courtyard, which does two things. It follows the path of an old Lenape Indian trail, but also we designed it to try and bring sunlight into the center of the building. And all of our buildings we design with a sun model. And then we're following that path of light. We designed this whole complex range of activities: community garden, playground. There's a science feature where we actually have a map of the stars above, the planets above this site in LED lights below. We have a senior section, an amphitheater, and we did these as little, we call them stones in this path, and then we weave this. So Sendero means path, so Sendero Verde is green path, and there's this path that then weaves between them all, and this is actually the landscape plan, and this is a rendering of it. So it's creating a pretty great community spaces open to the public during the day, community space in a neighborhood that lacks green space. This is actually a picture of the project in construction. The lower half on the right has actually been completed, and families are moving in every day while we're finishing building the left side. So just to give a sense of passive house, the typical building in New York City with current sources is consuming 130 kBTUs per square foot a year. And this building, passive house, requires that you go at 38 kBTUs, and we're even less. So I want to show you, I think there's some engineering geeks in the room or on the Zoom, and so I want to show you some of this, how. So it takes super duper attention to insulation and to isolation. So when it gets really cold or really hot outside, we want barriers. So for example, one of the interesting things is our buildings have parapets, and parapets are actually like a radiator fin that can either radiate out heat or bring in cold unless you isolate it. So I don't know if you can see the thin blue line. So there's, first of all, even in the parapet, there's 9 inches of mineral wool insulation. There's a cavity. There's a continuous air and water barrier. That's the blue line. And this is actually built, and then the facade is something called EFIS, which is a foam material facade. So you'll see, by the way, it says 21% glazing. So although our goal is to have a lot of light in the apartments, but not too much of the facade glazed, there's all triple glazed windows. The roof is R40 and the exterior walls are R24. This is the EFIS going in, and so you also see those blue lines are all the ceiling. So there's a tremendous amount of air sealing that's necessary to get rid of air infiltration. Every detail, so the way the flashing is done, is very carefully planned to stop thermal bridging. So I don't know if you can see this carefully, but see there's a thermal break. So look, there's the black beams on the right, there's the beige beams on the left, and if you can see, there's here, I'll point it out for those in the room. There is here. This is like a rubber intermediate surface that creates the thermal bridge from the exterior facing steel and the interior facing steel. So we have to do that everywhere to really get the energy efficiency that we need. So here again, this is anytime there's metal, the metal doesn't connect directly to the roof. In this case, that's a stair. You see it's got these little foam pads beneath it to form the thermal break. And we're using autoclaved aerated concrete masonry units, which are more insulating at the roof parapets. And this is just a thermal model to give you a sense of what happens when you create this barrier. So you can see on the right image, the right image of the left side, the heat is kept inside and is not traveling and radiating to the outside, which is what normally happens in a lot of buildings. And again, the shelf angles that are holding the bricks, every single one of these details needs a thermal break and insulation to be able to get a building that is this energy efficient. And the other thing is, by the way, these are all construction photos. So it means that we have to, the architects, engineers, the owners, all have to monitor every bit of installation to make sure it's installed properly, because otherwise you'll have gaps and you won't achieve the. It means then we do testing, and so this is, you see where this says proper window adjustment. So literally every apartment we do what's called a blower door test. We pressurize it, we check to see if there's leakage, and then we caulk or adjust or do whatever we have to do. So in many cases, we're using less expensive windows that we're then on site. So you can see, for example, on the right image, filling it with silicone caulk underneath the sill, and super sealing around the sill so that energy, so that cold air can't blow in. So it comes down to a lot of details and then a lot of paying attention. This is actually the facade being tested with a blower, an effective blower test to make sure that it doesn't leak. Then at the same time, we have a heat recovery system. So very tight buildings need air circulation, otherwise they get sick building syndrome. And so we're continually removing, bringing in fresh air, circulating the air, and then by taking the heat and the cool out of the exhausting air. Sorry. And then we have the whole heating and cooling system with something called a VR refrigerant flow that are so they're basic. It's not a heat pump; it's a different system. But anyway, every unit, every bedroom and living room has one of these units in it that provide heating and cooling. And even those, you know, we take the systems and we, you know, I don't know if you've ever looked at an air conditioner or heater that's facing the outside, but all kinds of cold air can blow through. It's very leaky. So we had to design whole sealing systems for those and then test them for air tightness. And even like here, like there's that white line is it's insulation around the control wires that are going in, and then see how we sealed around it. So it's these small details that lead to the big changes. Okay, so it's the same story over and over again. And this is some of the equipment that we're using. Enthalpy wheel, vertical rises, horizontal distribution of air, fresh air on each floor. And that's what achieves this result of this trend, this fantastic, significant reduction in energy use. And what this tells you is that we can use a whole lot energy if we design right, we design our details right, if we really pay attention, and it's permanent. I mean, it's the life of the building. This building will use less energy, significantly less energy, and be more comfortable and also more resilient. The building like this, if the power goes out in the middle of the winter and the heat goes off, will go down to about 58 degrees because it's such a good container of the heat that will come from the people and the sunlight during the day, etc. This costs today approximately 7% more than housing business building. But we think is a societal investment. I mean, we all need to be investing in helping solve the climate, reducing our climate impacts. And it certainly is reducing energy bills for low-income families too, et cetera. So we think it's really the right kind of investment society needs to be making. Last thing I'm going to talk to you about is our buying of existing buildings and then doing the same thing. So when we're buying existing affordable housing, mostly built in the 1970s and early 80s, all across America. And we buy these, you know, regular old concrete and brick buildings built 40 years ago. And we insulate and air seal them. If we can afford to replace the windows with high performance windows, we use integrated pest management because A lot of affordable housing has a lot of cockroaches and rats and stuff. And the stuff that's used to kill them is toxic. So we try and do everything as non-toxic. We do indigenous plants and efficient irrigation in our landscaping. It's amazing what happens when you tune a boiler. You can get another 10% efficiency out of it and better controls. We replace lighting fixtures with low LED lights and again, better controls. Use all healthy materials. We work with a fantastic not-for-profit in the United States called the Healthy Building Network, HBN.org maybe, or HBN Network. They're really worth checking out. They do so much great work on material science. And so, for example, one of the things we used to do is use a lot of recycled material because we thought that was really good. But it turns out most of the stuff in recycled material is toxic. That it includes a lot of fly ash from can be poisonous, or the dirty stuff that gets rebuilt into recycling. So we really learned how to analyze each one of our materials. Or the binder might be toxic of recycled materials, using the Healthy Building Network, energy efficient appliances, and low flow faucets, aerators, and shower heads. This basic, now there are variations when we can afford to, we put solar in our buildings and other things, but this is the basic strategy that we use in every building that we are renovating. And then also we have a social strategy. So we always have a community room. We always try and connect it to green space outside, a communication system, a fitness room, a computer lab, a medical screening room, so we can bring healthcare partners on site to work with our residents. A resident service coordinator is really important. It's just one person, a social service person, who meets with each resident, finds out what their needs are and their aspirations, and then connects them to after school programs or job training programs or college, high school equivalency degrees or healthcare services or whatever. We find you can put all these great facilities in, and these are all pictures from real projects, but the resident service coordinator is the person who activates it. So here's an example. We bought this project called Miramar Tower in LA. We spent $872,000 on renovating, on the green part of the renovations, but we got $561,000 of incentives. So one of the things that for affordable housing in the United States, utilities and cities and states all have different programs. You got to patch a whole bunch of programs together for green renovations. So we only invested $310,000, reduced carbon by 37%, energy by 16%, water reduction by 39%. And we have a 7.3-year payback, which is about a 15% return. So it all makes economic sense for us too. This is a project called Squire Village in Manchester, Connecticut. I'm going to focus a little more now on the social side, but we put solar on all the buildings, about 200 kilowatts of solar altogether. So although there was not enough solar for the residents, it covers all of the energy needs of us as building owner, the site lighting, the pumping of the water, the heating of the corridors, etc. We also built a $2 million community center for the residents that is almost passive house design and solar powered. And you'll see, actually, if you look, there's a generator on the lower right too. Then this becomes a community resilience center should there be a storm, knocks power out, etc. There were over 1,000 residents, about 1,000 residents who lived on this site with no social services whatsoever. So large gathering space. And then we build this in every single project. This health exam room, it costs like $8,000, a very simple thing to build. But this allows us then to partner with healthcare providers, they can be either public or private, to then come and meet with our residents and give them basic health services. And it's very cost efficient because if we have 1,000 residents and a resident service coordinator can make the appointments, means when a healthcare agency comes, we can fill their schedule with meetings. And so it makes it worthwhile for them to make the trip. We have our health providers recommend not only medicine, but diet and exercise. And so to do that, every one of our projects has to have a gym where people can exercise. And we also organize things like walking clubs and other things to try and get people to exercise. This happens to be in English. Uh, Unfortunately, in the United States, lower income people and even to some degree moderate income families cannot afford to eat. The incomes are just too low. And so we connect our residents with food banks or food shares or things called mobile groceries, all kinds of ways to bring affordable, healthy food to our residents. All of our projects have computer centers and after-school education programs for our kids, community gardens, having our residents plant healthy food, and just ways to increase socialization for kids. This work, by the way, spills out. This happens to be a park near one of our projects. So one of our goals is to also have a positive neighborhood influence. And the last thing is that we're dealing with highly traumatized environments often and do a lot of trauma-focused care, and meditation is one of and yoga are very excellent tools for that. So I want to end with this picture. I don't know if you guys know this, the Sagrada Familia, which is in Barcelona, an amazing building by Gaudi that inspires me, that is really designed in total Fibonacci proportions and very much to reflect the patterns of nature. I feel like we need to figure out how to do more and more of that to bring those patterns back into our work. And I want to end with this quote from Christopher Alexander, that making wholeness heals the maker. We are all in the business of making things, whether it's the making ideas, the making of buildings. And my sense is that we should be not making objects, we need to be making wholeness. And in the making of the wholeness, we heal ourselves. We make wholeness for ourselves too. So thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. Yes. Well, taking questions, my burning question is those Christmas trees that were planted a while back, how tall are they now? Because chopping one down and planting a new one will restrict the height, but they're going to get pretty big sometimes. So
No, those we didn't shut. So what happened was the decision was just to leave them there.
okay.
And so they're not hugely tall because they're all in planter boxes. So, but they're about 20 feet tall.
I'm sure there will be other questions from the audience, but for me, it's the monitoring overhead, this cost of checking the detailing has been followed.
Yes.
So do you have a financial cost for that on site, making sure that it is built according to the plan? You know, is that the 7% or is it?
No. So that's a very good question. The 7% is really in the additional materials. There's a little bit extra. So frankly, it falls upon the architects and engineers who do most of the monitoring and the construction teams. Part of this takes training. But what's so interesting is it's the cost of attention. It's not, so this project is it's about a $500 million project. And so so even if we spent another $200,000 in human labor during the construction period, that's not a big part to it, or even if it was more. But what it shows is how important attention to detail is. It's a different consciousness. And in our case, you know, we had an architecture and engineering team. The Sendero Verde is designed by a wonderful firm called Handel Architects. Everybody was passionate about this idea. We're going to build this amazing, large, passive house project. So, and part of it was even to get the construction workers, everybody into the mission and vision of it. And then, by the way, what also happens is any work that's not done right has to be corrected. So there's constant monitoring, you know, people realize at some point we better get it right or we're going to have to go back and redo it.
I think we're laughing in the audience because that's one of the recognised shortcomings in Britain in terms of the build quality. It doesn't always meet the requirements, and it's very difficult to go back and fix these things. I'm just going to stop sharing the screen.
Okay.
Take the first question. Right. Does someone have a question? Sorry.
So you mentioned a middle income office part of the other day.
Right.
And I was just wondering if you could speak more to why you call it co-op And also what within the communal spaces, like what are the interactions like
Right.
between different incomes and races?
Right. Okay, so for the people on the teams, the question was, what's a middle income co-op at Villa Verde? How's it work? And how well do races and people with different incomes interact? So first of all, there's a form of ownership that's particularly used in New York called a cooperative ownership. So what happens is the building is actually owned by a company. And you, when you buy an apartment, you buy shares in that company. So actually the residents collectively own the company, and then you actually have a lease. It's like you own your own apartment, but you own a piece of the whole building. And then you have the exclusive right to use your apartment. The advantage of this is that instead of taking out an individual mortgage, a lot of the building can take out one big mortgage, and then that means that the apartments the individuals can come up with less money to buy because there's a master mortgage on the whole building. I actually happen to be very interested in collective forms of ownership, and I think as a society we need more of those. So when we started the sales process, there was very little interest in buying. The South Bronx was a troubled neighborhood. It's become much more prosperous now. And what we were consistently being told was the middle income people did not want to live with the low income people. And the salespeople asked us to build a wall or a fence and separate it into two separate buildings, which I refused to do. So I turned to the salespeople. So I actually went up to the South Bronx and sat with the salespeople and said, okay, tell me how you're presenting the building, because something's wrong. This is not making sense to me. And they went through their presentation and I said, you didn't say a word about this being a green building. And they said, what are you talking about? It was really interesting. This has to do with this an amazing attention to detail. So it's not just with the architects and engineers, it's everybody. So I gave the sales team a lecture about how this is a green building. We sent them some material, and then I said, I want you to sell this as a green building. And that completely reframed it. That we never got a question again about why do rich people have to live with poor people. Because somehow this sense that we were all human beings in together in this green mission, in this amazing green project, unified the community. And so this idea of, we're different incomes and stuff just has melted. It's really interesting, the psychology of that.
Thank you. I've got another question, which is connected with the fact that you have quite high-rise developments. Right. And this is referring back to something I saw maybe 10 years ago in India as a development. And there was a deliberate height limitation to reduce the energy cost for services. So the pumping of water up the risers, the elevators. The elevators were also put at the end of the corridors, so people were less likely to get to the end and in fact use the stairs and so on. So do we understand much about the energy cost of being a vertical city rather than a horizontal city?
So there is an energy cost to pumping. And by the way, the state of California, I believe a third of the energy in this whole state is used for pumping water, partly because it's such a dry state and they have to move it's the large scale, it's not within the building, it's large scale irrigation pumping. But so the issue is we have so few sites we can build affordable housing on. So yes, lower rise has lower energy costs, but we are also trying to produce a lot of
I guess the same people who said 1% fewer homes is a problem, and now I'm telling you, going to bring them many stories.
No. See, here's the key though is to use variable speed and variable drive pumps. I mean, to use as efficient pumps as we can. It's to be cognizant. It's to be cognizant and to say if we think the benefit will be higher density, then we have a responsibility to make sure we're doing that at lower energy use.
I think we have a question online, if possible. Sarah Darby would like to ask a question. See if she can turn her microphone on, and if by the miracle of two-way communication. Here we are. So we can hear you, Sarah.
Oh, good. Excellent. Thank you very much, Jonathan, for that. It was really inspiring talk. I have a question about the first year or two of occupation, the soft landings sort of phase, when the residents are settling in. What do you find are the main issues that arise there as people get used to living in these buildings?
So first of all, the buildings are, from a systems point of view, they function pretty much like any other building. So we do give everybody a green manual, and one of the things we're really encouraging them to use is non-toxic cleaning materials and things like that, and to turn off their lights. So we're trying to encourage greener behavior. What is interesting is that we find this so in a market rate building, what we find is the initial population, people move in and 80% of them move within a year or two. And slowly you settle down to the kind of group of people who are going to stay long-term. And that number goes down. In affordable housing, it's such a rare resource that when a family by the way, there are electronic lotteries. That's how affordable housing is allocated in New York. And so people sign up and compete, and there will be 80,000 applicants for 500 or 700 apartments. So once you get one, you're going to do your best to stay, because the chance of getting another one is pretty rare, and the chance of getting another one in such a nice building is extremely rare. But there are a certain amount of people who will not pay their rent or will have bad behavior, who we will evict in a very long, slow, difficult process. So there's a couple of years of kind of the sorting of the population to the final, more stable one.
So Sarah, I didn't quite answer your soft landings question, but it sounds like they're in it to try and make the most of it, to win access to.
Yes, so then the other thing is that, so all our buildings have libraries and community rooms and computers and all that stuff. And unless we have a real focus on what we call resident services, unless we really actively engage in programming and bringing people, like, for example, we can have a community garden, but unless you have a community garden coordinator and somebody who's actually selling the idea and managing the idea, unless you have some people really who are kind of compost leaders, all that stuff, without the human leadership, the really full engagement with the building and the full engagement of the community doesn't happen.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Just before we take a question from the audience, you had some interesting units on display of kilo BTU per square feet.
Yeah.
And I think, someone might correct me, that one of those equates to about 3 kilowatts per square meter, which is the unit we would normally use.
Okay.
We'll have to go back and look at your slides, but I think it's 1 kilo BTU per square foot is around 3 kilowatts per square meter.
Right.
Because we tend to talk about kilowatt hours,
right.
Kilowatts per square meter.
And how is that?
I don't know.
As a number?
I only just did the unit conversion, not multiplying your numbers. But
No, no,
Per square foot or
no, meter.
cubic meter.
Square
square
meter.
meter.
Square meter.
That's
Got
good.
No,
Very
no,
good.
but that's for each one of the kilo BTUs per square feet. So we need to multiply.
Oh, I
that
see,
by
yes,
3.
yes. Quite
So the
right.
passive house figures.
Right.
So sorry, Brenda, maybe if you'll go
Yes.
to the next question.
Jonathan, that was all absolutely fascinating. I've got so many unanswered questions, but I suppose what I'm really interested in is how you got the workforce to deliver to that standard. So the first properties weren't passive house. Did you work with the same people and train them up to passive house standard? Was the architect the most important, the building contractor the most important, you the most important? How did it actually get to the standard that you delivered?
So the question was, how did we actually get to this standard? So first of all, this was a new team that we had not worked with before. The architect had designed a previous passive house project in New York, learned the details from that. The contractor is actually a partner. So there are 3 partners in this project: my company, a company called L&M, and a community-based partner called the Akasha Network. L&M has its own construction company. So we had a partner who was also the contractor, but most of their labor is subcontractors. They're hiring plumbers and electricians, et cetera. And they did a fantastic job of so this is, by the way, the architect had to put it all in the specifications. And then it took a lot of on-site training. And as I said, the first time somebody installs a window, it may not be right. You test it, you then show them. But by the time you've installed 1,800 windows or whatever the number is, by number 100 or 200, they're getting right. So it's an on-site, ongoing learning process. But also, people love to have a sense of purpose. People actually
love what?
A sense of purpose. I say that human beings grow towards purpose the way trees grow towards light. And if you are explicit about a purpose, if you give people a sense of mission and purpose and aspiration, I found universally people want to make the world a better place. They want to contribute. They want, and you can feel this on construction sites where people just don't really give a damn, and other construction sites where there's this total esprit de corps and people feel like they're creating something that matters, and that's the goal.
But was it crucial to have the architect who knew? How?
Yes, it's everything. It's crucial. Having an architect that knows, an engineer, as a mechanical engineer, instructional engineer, it takes this is, as you probably saw, the details are complicated.
Absolutely.
And so we invented new details. There are details here that hadn't been done before, but you need to you need a team that has that curiosity and desire to design them, and then you got to design them so they're implementable. This is, I view as an ongoing learning process, and my goal is that, and I believe that 5 years from now, the passive house industry will be building buildings for 4 or 5% more than versus 7%.
They will be building what?
Passive house buildings that only cost 5% more versus 70% more, because we'll become more familiar with the details, more expert. I showed you a lot of details that had to be hand assembled on site but maybe there'll be enough passive houses that now people will automatically cell block with, you can buy a brick with a foam pad on the bottom or whatever, pre-made at the factories. As volume grows and familiarity grows, the cost should come down.
Ask another question.
We do have another question in the audience, but we'll let you have one more. Yes.
Right, thank you. The other question I had, Jonathan, was I used to work in co-ops, by the way, so I know exactly what's involved. To what extent did living in a co-op affect people's outlook on life? How could you in any way monitor? Yes, they were delighted to move in. It was cheap, it was good, it was lovely. Thank goodness we got a secure place to stay. And then gradually they find out it's green, and gradually they find out it's a co-op. How did that filter into their lifestyle?
Right. So first of all, they know it's a co-op when they buy it because it's part of the financing.
They have to.
And they know it was green when they bought it because we told them. But how does it filter into their life? I have found that community is a muscle that has to be reinforced every day. That you actually need community leaders. That I'm a deep believer in collectivism and mutuality. And I wish that self-arising. And there are many indigenous cultures where they seem to be, but in Western cultures with all the distractions and the difficulties, and we find that it takes somebody to prime the pump, it takes leadership. It's amazing to me that you would think in a project with, say, 200 units and beds for 20 community gardens, that somehow the gardens and then they'd be filled. We find without a community garden leader who promotes the idea and coordinates people and makes sure that people don't fight about water or seeds or whatever, and the community gardens just don't happen. So it takes leadership. And I would love if anybody has suggestions on how one creates more naturally arising mutuality, because I think that's actually key to the future of the health of the world.
Thank you. Right. Can we come to your question now?
Yeah, it's always interesting listening to Brenda's questions because she's delving into the same things I'm curious about as well. Thank you. It's so inspiring. I think I've got a lot of questions in my head, so I'm trying to work out which is the key one. But
Ask them all.
I'm interested in what are the barriers to expansion. This is so exciting. It's like you kind of want it to go everywhere and happen lots. And is it? I can see some of it is the skills around architects. You know, have we got the architects coming on stream? Are they being trained in the right way? Ditto engineers. Or is it in America, is it more to do with the sort of right-wing approach to individualism, which is perhaps a barrier to community enterprise if you're creating? Or is it the financing? I did a project some years ago about financing buildings in the UK, and that was a major barrier. We couldn't put any, finances wouldn't put money into buildings which cost even 2-3% more at that time.
Right. So the question
seems like E7 seems like quite a big thing, so there must be some way to the finance.
So the question is, what are the barriers? Are they financing? Are they training? They're everything. So affordable housing in the United States is all subsidized, and therefore, as long as passive houses are very green buildings are going to cost more, we need governments to be willing to spend more. We're finding increasingly they are. And what's interesting is, so affordable housing is financed through a ridiculous system in the United States, but the key part is that there's a federal tax credit that's allocated to states by population, and then the states allocate it through competition to projects. And the competition includes points. So, for example, to win a tax credit allocation in the state of Pennsylvania has some version of green points now. But to win a tax credit project in the state of Pennsylvania, they give a larger percentage of points than many other states. So you essentially have to bid passive house to be able to win the points to build the project. Which means that, for example, in Philadelphia, there's more architects who are familiar with passive house. There's more trade people who are familiar with it because the system is kind of primed towards that. There are other states which have very low levels of green incentives. So there's a variety of skill level around the country. The other interesting thing is that I'm going to say something that's controversial in an academic institution, but there is a problem with tenure. So passive house is a relatively new idea. The efficiency is relatively new. So in many of the architecture schools in the United States, you have tenured professors who are teaching a certain design aesthetic. They have other aspirations for what they think they're supposed to teach. And there's a gap between them and the students because we're finding all young architecture students, almost all, really want to be super green. They're very, very interested in this. And that's where the using professors of practice can be helpful. But we're finding this training is typically not happening in architecture school. It's more typically happening on the job. But also at architecture school, you're learning bigger ideas and you're learning just how to kind of be an architect versus how to design, like, a window detail. That's not something that's really being taught in architecture school. That's something. So we're seeing a growth in the firms, seeing as more projects are getting financed, a growth in the contractors. Now, and we're seeing a increased focus on green finance. So, for example, we are about to build a passive house, affordable housing project in Washington, D.C. One of the most difficult things for a developer is what's called the pre-development finance. That we have to pay for the architects and lawyers and all this stuff before the money for the project comes in at what's called the financial closing. So there's going to be several $1 million. So we borrowed that money from something called the Washington, D.C. Green Bank. And the Green Bank terms are as follows. The loan is a 6% loan, 6% interest, but it's 5% if you follow the Energy Star guidelines. And it's 4% interest if you follow the Enterprise Green Community Guideline, which is a very good green guideline. And it's 3% if your building's passive house. So there's it's encouraging you to be greener. So that's not everywhere in the financial system, but we're beginning to see those ideas emerge. And if we as a world are really going to solve the climate crisis, and by the way, there's another crisis we talk about less, but it's equally important, which is the biodiversity loss crisis. We need to have our financial systems align towards achieving greener goals.
Okay.
Can I just ask, so that was brilliant discussion. Thank you very much for that. Affordable, the idea that affordable housing and low income occupants, you have the idea that low income occupants have to buy their way into affordable housing, isn't something that I'm familiar with in this country where social housing is predominantly rented.
Right.
Is that normal in New York?
No, it's quite rare, actually. This is one of the only cases where you have a co-op and rental together. There is currently no home ownership program in New York. There typically has, so 90%, 98% of the affordable housing in not only New York, but in the United States is rental, not ownership.
You don't mind, I mean, sorry. Yes.
I just wondered a practical thing. Can you open a window in the buildings?
Yes, you can, but what's really annoying is because we have these child safety rules that a child can't fall out of the window. The window 3 inches or something like they're very constrained, and but yes, you can open them.
Okay. And the other thing was last week we had an interesting talk about glazing.
Yes.
And sun coming into it. You might be able to explain it better than me, Ron, but the way the sun came in the summer and you that reflected back out again, so the place didn't get too hot, but in the winter it was allowed through. And I just wanted to, was that the kind of glazing you used in this, or?
So there's 2 different things. There's glazing and sun shading.
Yeah.
So on the Via Verde project, I don't know if you saw, there were these horizontal sunshades, and they were designed so that the summer sun, which is higher, gets blocked. It doesn't go into the apartment, and the winter sun, which is lower, does go in. So sun shading, which is a passive system, is one of the best ways to do it. The other thing is to use, I'm going to get this, low E coatings and which side of the glass you put them on, and that can regulate how the sunlight comes in and the heat either is allowed to pass out or not pass out.
And we heard last week from Harish Bhaskaran looking at smart windows that can adapt between the winter and summer setting to allow passive solar gain in the winter for heat gain, but to reflect that back out during the summer. But then those are smart windows which
cost more.
Cost more.
Right.
So passive features obviously not having the same expense associated. So the formal questions, if that's okay, would you be able to answer a couple after the end?
And just, was there anybody else online?
I think that was it for the questions we had.
Okay.
They've been very well behaved. So I'm just going to do a quick advert for what's coming up.
Please
so in a fortnight on a similar subject, we have Hélène Gosden from Arup speaking about retrofit at scale. This is a follow-on from the Project Leo, Local Energy Oxfordshire, and looking at improving energy efficiency across the energy system hierarchy. Retrofit at scale in the UK. And I think training is probably going to be one of the things that comes up in that. But next week, we'll be hearing from Jeff Hardy, who comes from the Grantham Institute at Imperial College, topic close to my heart, which is about decisions to make to enable smart local energy systems. But let's say thank you again to Jonathan for an excellent.
Thank you. Thank you.